The world watched as Mark and Diana Carney stepped off the plane in Kuala Lumpur, and what followed wasn't just a diplomatic welcome, it was a statement. Red carpets rolled, cameras flashed, and military bands played as Asia's leaders greeted the Canadian Prime Minister and his wife with open arms. This was no ordinary arrival. It was a message to Washington, Beijing, and the entire Western world. Canada now stands on its own. For decades, Canada's global relevance was defined by its proximity to one nation, the United States. But those days are fading fast. Under Carney's leadership, Ottawa is writing a new playbook, one built on independence, credibility, and strategic diplomacy. And the proof was in Malaysia's welcome. While Donald Trump prepared to attend the same summit, Asia's attention was firmly fixed on Canada's quiet power couple. This wasn't about photo ops or political theater. It was about symbolism, a changing world where Canada is no longer following anyone's lead. The red carpet wasn't rolled out for friendship. It was rolled out for recognition. Canada has arrived, and this time it isn't waiting for permission. When the Carneys jet touched down in Kuala Lumpur, the scene that unfolded looked more like the arrival of a superpower than a visiting delegation. Cameras flashed relentlessly, a military band played the Canadian anthem, and officials lined the runway with smiles that spoke louder than words. Asia had made up its mind Canada mattered, and the symbolism was unmistakable. This was the 2025 ASEAN Summit, a gathering where Asia defines its next decade. Yet the biggest story wasn't Donald Trump's arrival or his speeches about tariffs. It was the thunderous welcome given to Mark Carney. Malaysia's red carpet wasn't just a diplomatic courtesy. It was a message to the world that Canada is stepping into a new era of leadership. For years, summits like these revolved around Washington and Beijing, while Canada stood quietly in the background. Not this time. This time, the spotlight followed Ottawa's delegation everywhere it went. Asia's leaders weren't greeting a middle power. They were welcoming a nation that had proven it could lead with consistency, logic, and integrity, while others shouted and threatened. To the world watching, this wasn't just about trade. It was about respect. Carney's arrival sent a signal across continents that a nation once defined by its humility was now being celebrated for its strength. While Trump's entourage moved through the conference hall with tension and division, the Carneys represented something the world had been longing for: balance. And beneath the ceremony lay something deeper. This wasn't a one-time gesture. It was the formal announcement that Canada had entered the global stage as an equal, not as America's neighbor. The applause that greeted the Carneys wasn't for diplomacy, it was for transformation. For most of modern history, Canada's role in global politics could be summed up in one phrase: America's polite neighbor. Trade, defense, and diplomacy all revolved around the gravitational pull of Washington. But Mark Carney is rewriting that story entirely. His arrival in Malaysia wasn't just another foreign visit. It was the public unveiling of a new Canadian doctrine, one built on self-reliance, not subservience. Carney's core philosophy is simple: stability over spectacle. While the U.S. shouts about dominance, Canada builds trust. His government's latest plan to double exports to markets outside the United States within a decade might sound like an economic goal, but it's actually a geopolitical masterstroke. Diversifying trade isn't just about profits, it's about independence. By spreading Canada's economic reach across Asia, Africa, and Europe, Carney is ensuring no future leader in Washington can weaponize trade against Ottawa again. This isn't theoretical. Canada's new trade offices in Singapore, Seoul, and Jakarta are already opening, signaling a deliberate shift in foreign policy. The message: the global economy is moving east and Canada refuses to be left behind. Carney's calm, data-driven leadership has turned a once-overlooked nation into one of the most dependable players in international diplomacy. And perhaps the most striking thing is how he's doing it, not with fiery speeches or empty slogans, but with competence and credibility. The world sees a Canada that acts, not reacts. A country that doesn't wait for instructions from its southern neighbor. In Malaysia, that quiet confidence stood out like a beacon. Carney's approach is transforming Canada from a follower into a force, and every handshake in Asia proved that shift is already well underway. When word spread that both Mark Carney and Donald Trump would attend the ASEAN Summit, the media buzzed with one question: would they meet? But as the summit unfolded, the answer became clear. No meeting was scheduled, no handshake planned, and no photo op arranged. For many, that silence spoke louder than any speech. This wasn't a diplomatic oversight, it was a calculated signal. Carney didn't come to Asia chasing validation from Washington, he came to build something bigger. For decades, Canadian leaders treated U.S. approval like a badge of legitimacy. But Carney, standing beneath Malaysia's flags, quietly broke that tradition. His focus was entirely on strengthening ties with Asian economies, not salvaging old habits with the US. Trump's camp reportedly pushed for a quick meet and greet, something symbolic to ease rising tensions over tariffs and trade wars. But Ottawa politely declined. The reason? Carney's government didn't want the summit hijacked by American theatrics. This trip wasn't about personalities, it was about principles. While Trump held side meetings full of bluster and confrontation, Carney's schedule was packed with bilateral sessions on renewable energy, semiconductor supply chains, and agricultural trade. He was doing the work, the real work, of positioning Canada for the 21st century. That quiet refusal to engage on Trump's terms became a defining moment. For the first time, Canada didn't bend to US optics. It set its own agenda and stuck to it. Analysts called it strategic maturity, a term rarely used for Western leaders in today's polarized climate. By the summit's end, Trump's theatrics faded into the background, while Carney's restraint drew admiration. The snub wasn't personal, it was philosophical. Canada no longer needed to be seen beside America to prove its worth. It was already standing tall on its own. Mark Carney's entire visit to Asia revolved around one undeniable truth: the global center of gravity has shifted east. Asia now drives more than half of the world's trade in goods and services. It fuels innovation, manufacturing, and digital transformation. And Carney's message was clear: Canada's future lies where the momentum is. For decades, Ottawa treated Asia as a secondary market, a backup plan whenever US relations soured. But Carney has flipped that mindset completely. Asia isn't Plan B, one senior official said. Asia is Plan A in Seoul, Singapore, and Kuala Lumpur. Leaders echoed that sentiment, eager for a partner that wasn't bound by Washington's unpredictable mood swings. Canada's strengths align perfectly with Asia's ambitions: clean energy, critical minerals, AI, and advanced manufacturing. While American diplomacy has been clouded by tariffs and threats, Canada's offer was partnership. Mutual benefit, predictability. That's why in meetings behind closed doors, several ASEAN ministers reportedly described Carney as the most stable Western leader in the room. This shift is far bigger than trade numbers. It's psychological. Canada is embracing Asia not as a distant opportunity but as an essential part of its identity. From Vancouver's Pacific ports to Ontario's tech corridors, the entire Canadian economy is pivoting toward the Indo-Pacific. And unlike the United States, which often demands allegiance, Carney's Canada offers collaboration. He understands that influence in Asia doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from showing up, listening, and keeping promises. That's why his arrival resonated so deeply. By recognizing Asia as the world's true economic engine, Carney is ensuring Canada stays ahead of the curve, not behind it. The global map of power is being redrawn, and for the first time, Canada is holding the pen. Everywhere Mark Carney went, from Malaysia's state dinner halls to Singapore's economic forums, one theme followed him: trust. In an era defined by threats, sanctions, and political theater, Carney's calm, measured diplomacy stood out. He wasn't there to pressure anyone, but to partner with everyone. That alone made Canada's presence feel refreshingly different. For years, the world has watched the United States use economic muscle as a weapon, tariffs as punishment, alliances as leverage. But Carney's approach flipped that script. He reminded leaders that prosperity doesn't come from coercion, it comes from collaboration. Canada's message to Asia was simple: we build bridges, not barriers. This philosophy mirrors the foundation of Carney's leadership: a belief in a rules-based international order, one that values cooperation over confrontation. Asian leaders, weary of Western unpredictability, responded with enthusiasm. At the summit's economic forum, Carney's speech drew praise for its clarity and sincerity. Canada, he said, stands not above others but beside them. That line became a headline across regional media. It wasn't a soundbite, it was a statement of identity. Carney wasn't asking Asia to choose sides in the US-China rivalry. He was offering a third option, a middle path of mutual respect. Behind closed doors, ASEAN officials admitted that Carney's tone made negotiations smoother. Unlike Washington, Ottawa wasn't dictating terms, it was listening. And that's where real diplomacy begins. Carney's quiet power lies in this distinction: where others provoke, he persuades. By rejecting the politics of tension, Canada has become a stabilizing force in a volatile world. In the eyes of Asia, Carney wasn't just representing a country. He was representing a different kind of leadership, one that the world desperately needs. Carney's Asia mission wasn't just about economics, it was about rewiring how Canada sees itself. For generations, Canada's identity was tethered to its geography. A North American nation defined by its shared border and dependence on the United States. But what Carney unveiled in Asia was a mental shift: a quiet revolution in how Canadians think about their place in the world. Stop seeing Asia as an afterthought, Carney told business leaders in Kuala Lumpur. Start seeing it as the future. That sentence captured the spirit of his trip. Canada's pivot east isn't a temporary detour. It's the cornerstone of its next century. The strategy extends far beyond trade agreements. It's about building people-to-people connections, encouraging Canadian students to study in Seoul and Singapore, inviting Asian companies to invest in Vancouver and Toronto, and creating tech partnerships that link Canadian innovation with Asian scale. It's a web of relationships designed to outlast any single administration or political moment. Carney's vision is holistic. He knows that true power isn't measured only in GDP, but in trust, credibility, and human connection. He wants Canadians to see themselves not as followers of great powers, but as bridges between them. Even at home, this shift is changing policy. Universities are expanding Indo-Pacific programs. Trade missions are prioritizing smaller Asian economies that were once overlooked. And across Canada's business landscape, the phrase "beyond America" is no longer taboo, it's strategic. Carney isn't just leading Canada into new markets, he's leading Canadians into a new mindset. One where opportunity lies not in proximity but in perspective. This isn't just diversification, it's transformation. And it may be the boldest redefinition of Canadian identity in a generation. The global reaction to Carney's Asia tour was immediate and electrifying. News networks across Malaysia, Singapore, and South Korea described his arrival as a turning point for Western diplomacy. Editorials praised Canada's composure and forward-thinking vision, calling it a new brand of leadership built on respect. In a world exhausted by polarization and power plays, Carney's tone of steady confidence felt revolutionary. Asian analysts pointed out something Western media largely missed, that the summit's atmosphere itself shifted when Carney entered the room. Leaders who had grown wary of American unpredictability suddenly saw a partner who represented clarity, not chaos. One headline in the Straits Times summed it up perfectly: "Canada brings calm where others bring noise." In contrast, the U.S. delegation found itself sidelined. Trump's usual theatrics, the boasts, the blame, the last-minute demands barely made headlines. While Washington dominated the talking points of the past, Ottawa now dominated the tone of the future. Even European outlets took notice. The BBC called Carney's diplomacy a quiet masterclass, while France's Le Monde wrote that Canada is redefining the Western voice in Asia. Those words carried weight and worry. Because if Canada could build genuine trust with Asia, it meant the U.S. no longer monopolized Western credibility. At home, Canadians felt something they hadn't in years: pride. Not just in their prime minister, but in their country's renewed global identity. The trip reminded them that leadership doesn't need to shout to be heard, it just needs to show up with purpose. As Carney left the ASEAN Summit, the applause that followed him wasn't just for a politician. It was for a new idea that quiet strength, not loud ambition, is what wins the world's respect. Amid all the headlines and political analysis, one subtle but powerful image stood out: Mark and Diana Carney, side by side. Their presence together in Asia wasn't an accident of protocol. It was a carefully chosen symbol of balance, unity, and modern diplomacy. In a world where politics often feels dominated by ego and aggression, the Carneys projected something different: partnership. Diana Carney, an economist and advocate in her own right, brought warmth and intellect to every event she attended. Whether greeting students in Kuala Lumpur or sitting beside her husband during meetings with Asian leaders, her presence softened the optics of power. She wasn't there as decoration, she was there as an equal. That distinction did not go unnoticed. Asian media outlets were quick to highlight the symbolism. "The Carneys represent Canada's dual strength, intelligence, and empathy," wrote the Korea Herald. In countries where diplomacy values respect and family symbolism, seeing the Canadian Prime Minister arrive as part of a grounded, united duo resonated deeply. For many, it became a visual metaphor for Carney's leadership: pragmatic yet human, firm yet compassionate. This was soft power in motion. While Trump's entourage embodied confrontation and celebrity, the Carneys embodied cooperation and credibility. Even the small gestures mattered: the way they listened, the way they smiled, the way they spoke about shared values rather than victories. These weren't moments crafted for political theater. They were expressions of the kind of leadership Canada now aspires to offer the world. And as the summit closed, the image of Mr. and Mrs. Carney walking together across that red carpet became the enduring symbol of Canada's transformation. Not just a nation asserting power, but a people rediscovering their purpose. As the lights dimmed on the ASEAN Summit and the Carneys boarded their flight home, the meaning of their journey became clear: this wasn't just a diplomatic trip. It was the quiet birth of a new era. For the first time in modern history, Canada didn't attend an international gathering as someone's ally, but as someone's equal. The world had changed, and this time Canada had changed with it. From Kuala Lumpur to Seoul, Mark Carney's message was consistent. Canada is no longer defined by who it stands next to, but by what it stands for. Stability, partnership, vision. Those three words now form the backbone of Canada's global identity. The age of dependence, the age of waiting for Washington's approval, is over. What replaces it is something far more powerful: confidence. Carney's leadership embodies that shift. Calm in tone, deliberate in action, and relentlessly strategic, he's turned diplomacy into Canada's new currency. Where others divide, Canada unites. Where others threaten, Canada builds. That's why Asia rolled out the red carpet, not just for a man, but for a model of leadership the world desperately needs. Back home, Canadians are watching with a sense of renewed pride. They see their country no longer treated as a polite bystander, but as a global bridge between competing powers. And around the world, governments are realizing that behind Canada's soft voice lies a hard truth. Influence today belongs to those who can balance strength with empathy. The Carneys' grand welcome in Asia wasn't the end of a story, it was the beginning of one. The world no longer sees Canada as the quiet neighbor of the United States. It sees a leader measured, modern, and ready for the future.